Good afternoon. Last night, NATO forces aggressively struck targets throughout Yugoslavia. Allied planes flew more than 600 sorties and struck nearly 70 targets. It was NATO's most successful day in the 7 weeks of Operation Allied Force. Nearly half the strikes were against targets of opportunity in Kosovo, where NATO planes continued to inflict heavy damage on forces on the ground. These are the Serb forces that have turned Kosovo into a killing field, executing more than 4,600 Kosovar Albanians in mass murders and driving nearly 1.5 million people from their homes in villages. Every day, Milosevic's forces are getting weaker and NATO is getting stronger. As his losses mount, his ability to control Kosovo is going to decline. We see no signs that Milosevic is withdrawing his forces from Kosovo, and as I indicated yesterday, partial withdrawal is simply unacceptable. General Shelton is soon going to give you a detailed account of the impact that our strikes are having, and then Major General Wald will bring all of you up to date on recent operations. Today I'd like to discuss where we stand as NATO begins its 8th week of attacks. First, NATO remains united and determined to reach its military goal. We are achieving the military objective of degrading and damaging Milosevic's military machine, and we are debilitating his military at an increasing rate. NATO is encircling Yugoslavia and attacking from all directions. The deployment of additional strike aircraft flying in Hungary and Turkey will make it possible to attack more targets, more often, and more effectively. Our strikes are having an impact that goes beyond simply decimating the forces on the ground. For weeks we have seen reports that elite leaders in Yugoslavia have been sending their families out of the country. And now we're beginning to receive reports that senior military leaders are also sending their families out of Yugoslavia. Milosevic may not admit that he is taking his country down the road to ruin, politically, economically, and militarily, but his top leadership is apparently more realistic. And at the very least, they are hedging their bets by hiding their assets and their families. Second, NATO is united and determined to achieve its diplomatic goals. The Serbs must stop killing in Kosovo. They must withdraw their forces. An international force with NATO at its core must go into Kosovo to maintain peace and stability so the refugees can return. And the Kosovar Albanians must achieve autonomous self-government. This week, Camp Hope, which the United States built in Albania, is going to open its shelter to refugees from Kosovo. It's an important step to care for these refugees. But it's only a temporary measure. The only solution to the crisis is to stop the killing so that the displaced Kosovars can return home and to rebuild their lives. At every turn, Milosevic has refused to accept peaceful solutions to the crisis he has created. He refused to end his campaign against the Kosovar Albanians last fall. He refused to accept a negotiated settlement this year. And he has refused to understand that Europe and the United States simply are not going to tolerate ethnic warfare for the second time in a century. This is a fight between good and evil, and NATO is not going to allow evil to prevail. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good afternoon to each of you. As Secretary Cohen just said, Operation Allied Force is proceeding well, and the Serb Army and security forces are being systematically and effectively attacked by NATO air power. After 7 full weeks of airstrikes, we have significantly reduced the effectiveness and the capabilities of the Yugoslav Army and its security infrastructure. The Yugoslav Integrated Air Defense System, though it remains a threat to our pilots and to our air crews, has been hit hard, and more than half of Milosevic's modern surface-to-air missile radars have been damaged or destroyed. As you know, he has lost nearly all of his frontline MiG-29 fighters and nearly 20% of his ground attack aircraft. Both of his oil refineries are shut down, and more than a third of his military reserve fuel storage is destroyed or severely damaged. Finally, and this is not an all-inclusive list, we have seriously damaged Milosevic's military-industrial capacity, reducing his ability to repair and maintain his aircraft by 70% and his ammunition production capacity by 2/3. In Kosovo itself, Milosevic's army and his special police units continue to suffer damage from NATO airstrikes. Nearly a quarter of his armored vehicles, that is, tanks and armored personnel carriers, have been damaged or destroyed, and roughly 40% of the Serb artillery in Kosovo has been taken out. Most of the ammunition and fuel supplies of the Serb Third Army, which is, you know by now, probably is the unit that operates in Kosovo, has been destroyed, along with more than half of the infrastructure that supports this force. Distribution networks into Kosovo for critical supplies, such as fuel and ammunition, have been severely disrupted. Rail lines into Kosovo are severed, and about half the roadways into Kosovo have been damaged as well. We also continue to receive significant indications of growing unrest and discontent within the ranks of the Yugoslav army. Of course, these reports can hardly come as a surprise. You would expect that any military force that is first used against helpless civilians and then is subjected to tremendous pounding by NATO aircraft would have considerable doubts about its future and about the leadership that has gotten the military into this situation. I don't mean to paint too rosy a picture here. We are conservative in our estimates, and it is possible that a force like the one Milosevic is using for ethnic cleansing and terror in Kosovo could hold out for quite some time. But it is clear that NATO's air campaign is exacting a significant toll on Serb forces in Kosovo and throughout the rest of Yugoslavia. NATO's military objectives remain clear. Our cause is just, and our determination is unswerving. We will continue to grind away at the Serb military and security forces until they can no longer maintain their grip on Kosovo, or until Milosevic decides that he has had enough and agrees to the conditions that have been set by NATO. Thank you, and now Secretary Cohen and I will be happy to take your questions.
Mr. Secretary, Secretary General Solana said at Duranity, I believe, that the Apaches would be used very soon. Could you tell us whether the President has signed off on authorization to use the Apaches, and will they in fact be used soon?
Well, as General Clark indicated last week when we were with him at Brussels, that they will be used at a time and place of his choosing. We will not indicate in advance when that time will come. It will come as a surprise to Milosevic, but that will be up to General Clark in terms of his employment of that.
Mr. Secretary, just to follow up on that, can you just say whether or not you've determined what happened in these two training accidents and whether or not you've been able to put that behind you or take into account that in terms of these Apaches being ready for use in combat?
I'm not sure that the investigation or inquiry has been completed in terms of what exactly took place with both Apaches. They had different circumstances of their failures. Pilot error perhaps involved, but I think we have to wait for the outcome of the inquiry. It's not complete yet, to my knowledge.
Well, nevertheless, just if I could get an answer, will that in any way affect their deployment schedule now, or have you been able to put that behind you?
That will not affect their employment schedule at all. It's a very tough mission that they're being asked to perform. That's the reason why General Clark has taken as much time to make sure that he is satisfied that the training is complete. It's a very harsh terrain under very difficult circumstances. These Apaches and their training requires great skill and a full training measure before they're actually employed, so that will not affect their employment.
Secretary, last week at the G8, it seemed as though Russia was prepared to at least engage with us in brokering a possible peace. But with the turmoil that's going on in Russia today, how do you read the tea leaves in the samovar? Is that now impossible, or any peace likely?
I'm not sure exactly what the status is right now with respect to the Russian involvement. I know that Secretary Talbot is in Moscow. I have not had a chance to talk to him or to talk to the Secretary of State to determine what the status of his discussions are. We would hope and expect that Russia would continue to play a constructive role as far as bringing Milosevic around to accepting NATO's conditions. But failing that, we will continue to do what we're doing.
Follow-up. Is the Russian participation key to any peace agreement or not necessarily necessary?
Well, I wouldn't say it's key. I think it's important that Russia, if it can play a constructive role, be engaged in this process. Not only would the United States favor that, but NATO countries generally would favor that. But nothing or no country is indispensable as such. We think they could play an important role, and we hope that they will continue to play an important role in bringing about Milosevic to agree to these terms. But if they are no longer engaged, then there may be others who would seek to play that role, but it really has to do with Milosevic. It does not have to do with us. We've indicated this is going to continue until such time as the conditions are agreed to. So if it's Russia or someone else, he has to understand there'll be no surcease, no relief for him until such time as there is compliance.
General Shelton, you said the Serb forces could hold out for quite some time still. Could they hold out for months? Could they hold out indefinitely? And is NATO prepared to continue indefinitely?
I think NATO has made it very clear that our military objective can continue for an indefinite period of time. We are prepared. We have the munitions, everything that we would need to do that. As to when or how long they hold out, I think is up to Milosevic. It's up to him to determine just how much of his force he wants to lose, how much of his capability he wants to see disappear, how much of his military-industrial complex will go out. A lot of things I think he's got to he must weigh, but one thing's for sure: NATO's resolve is strong right now. We're moving ahead, and we continue with that mission.
He's capable of holding out for another 50 days?
I don't think we want to put timelines on it. I think that how long he wants to see his forces continue to be degraded, destroyed, his capabilities reduced is something he's got to weigh, and I would say that it's probably weighing very heavily on his mind right now.
Could you give
Jamie, in terms of your question on the Apaches, we have in fact replaced the two that were damaged or destroyed.
Well, General Shelton, you said this is one of the most successful days of this campaign so far. It was conducted without the Apaches. Do you really need these attack helicopters, and what additional will they allow you to do that you weren't able to do, say, on today, one of the most successful days of the campaign?
Well, again, when we decide to employ them will be at a time and place of our choosing, and we have been very successful and are continuing. As you know, the weather is not always conducive, and if in fact we were to see long periods of bad weather, then they would offer an alternative. But again, that is something that we'll let the sink decide.
General, could you elaborate a little bit on the unrest that you mentioned earlier in the Serb military? What kinds of things are you seeing?
I don't want to go into any great detail there because I don't want to divulge the sources that we obtain it from, but there are indications of things like desertions, their failure to mobilize, there are indications that some of the leadership is getting a little bit distraught over things like the loss of their military industrial complex, a lot of their infrastructure. They're seeing their capabilities degraded, reduced. They know what the impact is, and I mean, for a country that's got $11 billion GNP, $11 to $12 billion GNP, they know that this is going to take a long time to ever get back to where they started when it's over.
General, it's been reported widely that in B-2 using JDAM bombs, 3 JDAM bombs hit the Chinese embassy on Friday night or Saturday morning, whichever it will. And I would ask you, gentlemen, can you confirm that this is accurate, that this is true?
I don't think we want to get into the operational level of detail as to what types of weapons we use on what kind of targets.
Okay, but
General, would you tell us, give us a little better idea of the forces in Kosovo? I mean, we started off with 46,000, about 300 tanks. 50 days later, what is that tank body count, artillery deployment look like in Kosovo?
Troops killed.
I think that one thing we don't want to get into is the body count syndrome that you know that too often these types of conflicts can grow into. We continue to hammer away. We know about what he's got, what he started with. We know about what he's got there now. It's not precise. That's why I said we're conservative in our estimates. For example, we're getting some indications that the numbers killed are considerably higher than we had estimated. But again, I'd rather let Milosevic wonder about what we know about the damage that we're doing and let him guess at it.
Gentlemen, you said yesterday, and Mr. Secretary, you said in answer to a question by Senator Inouye that while U.S. forces have high morale, they're a bit stretched. Are you concerned with the current op tempo, and is there going to be some sort of a rotation system in for the air crew?
What I indicated was that morale is very high. It's very high in Aviano, Ramstein, wherever our pilots and crews are operating. What I indicated to the Senate yesterday was that while it's high today, if it goes for lengthy periods of time, unless there is some rotation, then that can have an impact upon that morale. So right now it's high, it has been high, and while they're carrying out their missions as successfully as they are today, it is likely to remain very high. I simply wanted to indicate that when we're operating at that tempo, that it can have a downside to it unless some of the pilots rotate and the crews are given rest. But I can tell you right now that having come back from the region, it couldn't be higher than it is right now. They are very happy and satisfied with the effort that they're making. They're working 14, 15, 16 hours a day, and they understand that they're doing the right thing, and they have the right mission, and they know that they're helping a lot of innocent people. So I would just say that this campaign we intend to carry on for some time. That is the reason I requested in the supplemental funding request that we carry it through to the end of this fiscal year, which would be the end of September. And if necessary, we could and would go back for additional supplemental funding if it becomes necessary. So we intend to continue this campaign as long as necessary, and we will rotate the crews as is necessary to make sure that that morale stays at a high rate.
Mr. Secretary, there are reports that oil is still continuing to flow into Yugoslavia, not only through Montenegro, but through the borders of some neighboring countries. To what extent is that hampering our efforts to cut off Milosevic's petroleum supplies, and what do we intend to do about it?
Well, I think some oil still is continuing to flow into Serbia through various routes, some perhaps by sea, others by road, but it has been reduced in substantial amounts as a result of our efforts to interdict and cut off those lines of communication. With respect to those going in by sea, the EU, we believe, will continue to support their resolution against supplying any fuel to Milosevic, and there will be consequences, I'm sure, taken against those who would seek to violate it in the way of cutting off access to trade to various countries. So there will be economic consequences, some political isolation as a result of it. At this point, there has not been a resolution of the force being used to interdict those ships that would seek to violate the EU resolution or that of NATO.
The lack of
I think they're still trying to resolve the legal issues involved in it. But again, NATO is very committed on this issue, and to the extent that countries violate it, there can be political consequences to it and economic consequences.
Mr. Secretary, on oil, why didn't you bomb the terminals on land and the pipelines that lead into Yugoslavia from Montenegro?
That's always a possibility. We have chosen not to do so at this time. For a variety of reasons, we believe that Montenegro, we want to support them as much as possible. They do have a fledgling democracy there, and we are seeking not to give Milosevic any excuse to try to move against Montenegro. In the event that we find that somehow the forces of democracy are being subverted by Milosevic, there are always other options available to us.
Secretary, you said at the time that the 3 American prisoners were released that you would be looking at the situation of the 2 Yugoslav prisoners of war. Have you looked at it, and have you come to any conclusions?
Frankly, I have not in the last few days. I've been somewhat preoccupied with other issues. But I assume that that matter will be resolved in a reasonably short period of time, but I haven't looked at it in the last couple of days.
Specifically on the issue of oil getting into Serbia, the Washington Times and some others reported today that Greece was violating the embargo. Any evidence that the government of Greece was in fact doing that?
I am not aware that the government of Greece is doing it. It may be that my understanding is it was under a different flag, so I don't know whether the government of Greece either understood this or is somehow involved in it. I don't have the information yet, but I would, again, point you to the EU resolution and also to NATO's resolution on this, and I believe that all members will comply with cutting off energy going into Serbia.
Shelton, can I ask you about the tanks for a second? Let's get back just for a moment, if we may. Not getting into a body count, but how many of those 300 or 400, the number's still a little unclear to us, how many of those tanks have you either taken out or neutralized, and is the tank threat still a problem in Kosovo?
The tank threat has been diminished, I think, by a couple of ways. Number one is the numbers that have been damaged or destroyed. But just as importantly, I think, is the fact that they know now that we're looking for them. They're having to disperse, they're having to hide, and of course a tank that is being hidden in the village or kept well out of the area, is out of the immediate area of where they need it to operate, is not of much use. And so it's a combination of trying to destroy or damage the tank, which we've done, combined with the dispersal and the hiding they've been forced into, that has significantly reduced his armor threat down in that area. And I think from all indications has allowed the UCK to attain some degree of success in some of the areas that they've attacked.
Are you giving us a number, or have you given us a number on the number you think you've destroyed?
I gave you a percentage while ago, yes.
General Shelton, can I follow up on that? I mean, given all this degradation that you've laid out, what then goes into your assessment that he could hold on? What makes you come to that judgment?
Well, I think that the effective tool that Milosevic's forces have used have been rifles and pistols that they've shot people through the head with, which gets down to the individual thug that otherwise known as a VJ or a MUP that is, in fact, doing the ethnic cleansing, taking the revenge, if you will, against the Kosovo Albanians. And I think that those can be effective until such time as he calls them off, or until such time as the UCK, as the VJ and MUP forces are reduced to the level that the Kosovo Albanians, UCK or KLA, are able then to drive them out of Kosovo, balancing, leveling the balance of power between the two forces.
So, excuse me, I'm not clear. Are you saying that eventually it's going to have to be the KLA that's going to have to...
As we've said all along, we'll continue to reduce his capabilities until such time as the balance of power shifts so that the UCK can now attack the VJ and the MUP again with a less amount of armament, armored personnel carriers, vehicles, tanks, things of this type. Or until such time as Milosevic decides that he's losing so much of his force that it's time to negotiate his way out of it and meet NATO's demands.
Just briefly, in a totally different area, there's a lot of criticism, growing criticism from human rights groups about the use of clustered munitions in this campaign. Given the fact that you are attacking and using these in highly populated areas, could you explain why clustered munitions are the correct weapon to still use in these areas?
Let me say right up front, we do everything we can, as I think we've said numerous times, to avoid what we call unintended consequences or collateral damage. But it is important that we use the most effective system that we've got against a particular target. And I think when General Wald comes up in a few moments and shows you an example of using, for, in this case, the cluster munitions, you'll see how effective they can be. Again, that we look at each target, we weaponeer that target for the greatest effect, and then look at what the collateral damage will be as a result of that. And if necessary, we can change the weaponeering to still be effective and reduce the collateral damage. And that's what we try to do.
Both of you addressed this sort of broad criticism that the reason this bombing campaign has yet to produce the desired effect is that it fails to apply the doctrine of decisive or overwhelming force, that this has been a gradual force, and it's not, with the lack of ground troops and whatever, it's not the kind of force needed to get the job done. I mean, so that seems to be a perception of some. Can you just address that?
Well, we are getting the job done. We are accomplishing that which we set out to do. We are intensifying the air campaign. We indicated from the very beginning it was going to be difficult because of weather limitations, because of the geography, because of the size of the air defense system that Milosevic has. We would not, under any circumstances, contemplate putting any kind of a land force in prior to completing an air operation. And so we think that we have, in fact, achieved and are achieving our goals, and we are substantially reducing his military capability. And we believe that you're seeing evidence of that right now. You're seeing this is, I would say, when you have roughly 1,000 aircraft that are operating on a 24-hour basis coming from 360 degrees at Milosevic, that's a pretty decisive force. And we believe that you will see decisive consequences on the ground. If you look at the damage being done to the lines of communication, to his command control communication, if you look at what has been done to his petroleum refining capacity, to his ammunition production capability, all of that, I think, is very significant. And each day that goes by is going to get much worse for him. That each day that goes by, there will be another 600 sorties flown, or 700, and they will go after not only those items or instruments of his power, they'll be going after the forces in the field. As General Wald will tell you, almost half, or slightly over half, of all the targets last evening or yesterday were in the forces in the field in Kosovo. So we're going after forces in the field, and we're also going after those targets throughout Serbia, which really pertain to his maintaining his military.
You underscored earlier that there was something different and significant, that now military leaders are moving their families out of Belgrade, I presume.
Right.
What are the possibilities of what that means? Would that possibly mean that the military leaders themselves would defect like the Iraqis did, or is it just precaution? I mean, what is the significance of that evacuation?
I mean, it's subject to anyone's interpretation, but I would say that when you have the elite of Serbia moving their families out, moving their wealth out of Belgrade and other places, when you now see that senior level military leaders are doing similar things, it tells you that there is a declining degree of confidence in what Milosevic has done and is doing. I believe it represents that they are concerned that he has taken them down to the road of ruin. I think that's clear economically it's taking place. It's clear from a political point of view. He is completely isolated. There is only one other country that has openly endorsed what Milosevic, basically his power, that is Belarus. But there is no other country that has endorsed what he is doing. In fact, he is politically isolated in the region and throughout much of the Western world, certainly, and I believe throughout the international community. And so he has taken them down to this road of ruin, and I think that they are now seeing the handwriting on the wall, and it's not a forgery. Basically, they see day after day that they are getting hit and hit hard, and that that's a price that they are perhaps unwilling to pay, certainly for their families, and they're protecting their families. I assume they're moving their assets out as well. And so, to me, it reflects a declining degree of confidence in what he is doing.
No defections, sir.
And there are defections taking place as well in some of the forces in the south.
Mr. Secretary, will strike aircraft be operating out of Turkey now? Will they be flying out of Turkey? And also, did you discuss with the Croatians a possible deployment of artillery in Croatia?
I did not discuss that with the Croatians. We discussed a wide variety of issues in terms of their progress and the roadmap to PFP status, but it was a wide range of issues. I didn't discuss artillery with them.
And have the Turks allowed strike aircraft to be used?
I believe that we'll have the full support of Turkey to conduct whatever operations are necessary.
Mr. Secretary, what sort of opposition are you seeing from actual senior leaders in the Serb military toward Milosevic beyond the families moving out? There had been reports of generals under house arrest, and then I've got a Russia question.
It's hard to make that determination right now in terms of how much unrest there is in the senior ranks. You may recall he has purged those who had expressed discontent with what he was doing this past year. So he has basically yes people surrounding him. So it's hard to make that determination now of how much discontent there is. I think the sign that they are now moving family out is some indication that they are lacking some confidence in his abilities right now to lead them out of this particular situation.
And given the growing turmoil in Russia, do you have any growing concerns over their positive control of their strategic and tactical nuclear arsenals? Is there any increased concern here?
Well, we have always tried to maintain very close contact with them on a military-to-military basis. We still maintain that contact. They are as concerned as anyone will be concerned about their own security measures. And so even though there's political, you said turmoil, but I would say some political problems right now in terms of who is going to be make up part of the cabinet, prime minister, and so forth. I believe that they are concerned about maintaining security over their systems, and we continue to work with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want a break before General Wald? Do you want to go right into it? No? Go ahead. All right. You're so popular.
Bring on the Christian ring.
Give me an assignment. The Secretary and the Chairman both mentioned the weather. Excuse me, and as it actually shows here, it's supposed to be red today. It's been good all day. Yesterday was outstanding, clear all day, and the day before as well. And so over the last few days, we've flown more sorties than we had in the past, several more, in about the 100 range more. And tomorrow looks even better, and as you see this forecast coming up, the experience we've had in the past is we should start having several periods of really good weather over time. And as that happens, the operational tempo will increase significantly. And I think tomorrow they're talking in the 700-800 range of sorties.
Versus today, which was what?
About 660.
This is an all-time high, I mean, in 50 days, 660?
It's getting more and more. I'm sure it'll be the highest. But yesterday, as I mentioned earlier, about 61 targets, 31 of those plus were fielded forces. There was another MiG-29 destroyed. I'll show you a film of that in a little bit. It was used, a cluster bomb destroyed that target. Also 5 more MiG-21s on the ground. Several command and control targets, some sustainment. Air defense continues to be struck hard, and we continue to take his bridges down, mobility to, if he does decide to leave, make it harder for him, or if he decides to reinforce, make it even harder to reinforce.
Did you say 69 targets?
61 plus. Real quickly, just to review, we haven't gone over this for a while. The contributions continue to come in. They need the contributions for the refugees. 25 countries now have accepted refugees. You can see the number of short tons of both shelter, food, equipment, and bedding. But once again, from what we understand, the international community does still need food and shelter, and as it gets toward the fall period, we'll need even more. The refugees continue to come into the States. There's about 1,277 at Fort Dix right now. The capacity there is 3,000. 1,379 have actually arrived in the States. Some of those have gone to families as well. As you remember, the first 102 out of this flight from JFK actually went directly to families, and those flights will continue over the next month until they hit around the 20,000 capacity range. Camp Hope was handed over to the CARE international NGO organization today. The plan was to ramp up to be finished at about day 12 here, and they actually finished a little early. And they think the next 2 actually increments for the camp, for the full camp to be completed, will be about the 25th of May. They should start moving in individuals tomorrow into the camp, and then it'll be fully turned over to the UNHCR, CARE, and other organizations at the end of the month. Just wanted to show just a few images today of these. I'm going to show 3 runway images. This is the runway at Nice Air Base that was hit here by. These are actually Mark 82 bombs from a B-52, and all the bombs landed around the airfield. The difference here between how we were hitting these airfields before and now is you can see some areas here where several bombs have hit, and it makes it just about impossible to repair that runway quickly. So out of their 7 major airfields, 5 of them are closed down right now. Another one at Sombor, same type of thing. These are 2 B-52 sorties that were flown. This distance here, as I said, is probably about between 500 and 1,000 feet. Very tight cluster on both of these. And you can see the damage to the runway is pretty significant at both ends here.
Feet, not yards.
1,000 feet, right? Did I say yards?
No.
Once again, Ober Airfield, same type thing. A couple aircrafts cutting off both the major taxiway, which can be used as an alternate runway, and the runway itself. And once again, those are closed. And you'll see later in film that some of the aircraft are being moved around on the runways, and when we do that, we'll catch them out in the open.
That's the work of cluster bombs?
Now, that's the work of Mark 82, 500-pound gravity bombs. Seneca Airfield, same type of thing. You can see the airfield itself being hit by, in this case, I think there's about 84 Mark 82s in that area, and it closes the runway down. Makes it very difficult to repair. I just selected a handful of the film from yesterday. There are dozens of these films that I could show, but I won't. I'll show several for Charlie. I know you're looking forward to this today again.
I'll see the Chinese embassy one.
I think you saw a lot of that on TV already from the BDA from the ground. This is some lines of communication. Once again, a bridge, F-16 out of Aviano with laser-guided bombs. Hits both ends of the bridge almost simultaneously, 2 different aircraft. That bridge was not dropped. It is probably open to foot traffic at best, but you wouldn't want to take anything heavy across it now. Another highway bridge. I'll just show you this, that will continue to take on his lines of communication, and his ability to resupply or to leave in great numbers will be hindered. The first bomb landed actually in the water. Second one landed at the abutment. They say it was damage beyond repair. We'll get EO for that later. Continue to hit his petroleum sustainment. Part of what General Shelton alluded to earlier about their tanks parked is that they don't have the fuel to operate their tanks like they'd want to. They still have fuel, but not a lot. This is at Nice Air Base, 2 bombs, 2 different sorties. This one here you can see is an actual, there must have been a lot of fuel in this one because it plumes about as big as I've seen since the beginning of this. Command and control. He's having a tough time with his command and control. He still has workarounds, but we continue to take it down. Kragujevac Army Barracks, F-16 laser-guided bomb. You'll see that was 2 flights, 2 F-16s, 2 targets. So military relay site in central Serbia from an F-117 LGB. There's actually 2 targets here as well. These are 2 aircraft. One will hit here, one will hit over here. You see the bombs coming in primary and secondary targets. If that's the first aircraft's bombs, you'll see another one here in a second. There's the second one. As this adds up, he's having a difficult time with his normal command and control, and he has to use workarounds, which makes it a lot easier for us to detect that as well. Military radio relay station. This is a tough target. And you'll see as this bomb enters the building, it actually has significant damage on the rest of the building as it starts, the explosion egresses from various parts in the building.
What are the buildings all around that target?
Those are would be considered collateral damage buildings that we wouldn't want to hit. And obviously that's a tough target for a pilot to hit. Forces on the ground, fielded forces. The barracks in central Serbia. This is a F-117 with a weather abort. The weather came in and he wasn't able to drop. Still trying to find some shots for Jamie that show misses. But this is one of those targets where you have to come off, and there was some AAA coming through there as we left. The barracks in central Serbia, restrike. You can see this individual here is pretty fortunate, gets out of the way in time. I'm sure he doesn't know it's coming, but it's fortunate for him.
This is the same barracks?
That's a different barracks.
I think there were people in them at the time.
I'm not sure if there was or not. It was night, so it could have been. Serb Forces Support Building in the Kosovo Engagement Zone, F-16 with LGB. This was a couple days ago. Continue to hit the fielded forces, taking away its ability to either sustain or where they live or where they command and control from or where they sleep or where they can have shelter or heat so they can live outdoors like the people are trying to make do that. And there were 31 plus of these targets yesterday. There were some cluster downs down below in a second engagement. Some military trucks in the Kosovo engagement zone. This is a miss. It looks like it hits, but it turns out to be a miss. There's some damage on the trucks that didn't destroy all 4 of them, and there's a ridge line right here, and it could have been the laser maybe goes over them. Some more trucks. That actually, the first one, that was a hit. This is the one that was a miss. Right here, you'll see it a lot better. These are backwards. The first one missed, the second one hit. There's a little ridge there. The laser probably is on the other side, and it just went over the top of them. We restruck that on the second one. Some tanks in a tree line. This is F-16s with cluster bombs. Once again, these targets are out in the open in areas where there wouldn't be as much chance for any collateral damage. This is a forward air controller actually filming these bombs coming in. That's not his bombs. He's filming his wingman. Integrated air defense site.
Would those cluster bombs be able to take out tanks?
Yes, they would. It's a MiG-21 at an airfield in Bonchanika, and you'll see this actually not at the airfield itself. It's off of it on a road. You'll see underneath it just comes in. This is actually a F-15E with an AGM-130 optical bomb. You'll see the netting over it. They've tried to camouflage it as it comes in, unsuccessfully. This is a MiG-29. This is the 11th one out of 14 that have been destroyed. This is cluster bombs at Nice Airfield. And once again, they try to move them around as best they can, but without much success here. You can see that it actually does start burning and blowing up. So the majority of its frontline fighters, that was actually an F-15, or F-16, excuse me. Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
You said 11 or 14 MiG-29 were destroyed.
We think it's 11. There may be one that's just damaged out of that 14, but we think there's 11 destroyed.
Do you have any similar numbers like that, just even round numbers for the tanks? We've been seeing tanks. Do you have any
I think
round number? How
General
many
Shelton
tanks
gave a percentage of what it is, and I think it's in the dozens.
Dozens of tanks?
Dozens of tanks.
Yes. General, go ahead, John. The Secretary said on Monday that you had not stopped bombing. There was no orders to stop bombing Belgrade, and yet Belgrade has not been bombed. Could you tell us why?
Well, the SINC, General Clark, will decide when to hit which targets at which time he wants. There have been some targets close to Belgrade, I understand, over the last few nights attacked. I don't know of any order whatsoever from any place that I've heard of to stop. So with the weather really good in the Kosovo area, that was a good place to go with the type of targets we needed to hit, and there was a large concentration of the attacks in the Kosovo area. As you saw, there were bomber B-52s as well as B-1s, and so the majority happened to be in that particular area at this time. So there's not a moratorium on any target that I know of.
Can you just give us the current number on how many to date, now that you've had this most successful day to date, how many sorties, how many attack sorties, how many fixed targets, how many targets of opportunity have been hit so far in this campaign? What are we up to?
The sortie numbers are in the category, and this counting support and tankers, in the category of 20,000 or so. It's probably a little less than that. The attack sorties are where they're actually dropping a bomb on a sortie is over 5,000. There are combat air patrol sorties that are in the same number of sorties, probably about 4,000 or so. And as the air superiority is, we gain more in air superiority. Some of those aircraft that are flying combat air patrol will be re-rolled to bombing. And then there are suppression of enemy air defense sorties as well. So out of that 20,000, the number of actual aircraft that are flying strike, combat support, SEAD type missions are probably in the 14 or so thousand range. And I think the number of bombs is getting close to 10,000. And some of those targets, of course, have been restruck. So several times, some of these bombs actually in one target, as you saw on the airfields, you're dropping 84 Mark 82s at a time. So the numbers don't tell the real story.
Well, Secretary Cohen yesterday used the number approximately 380 targets to date. I think he was talking about both fixed and targets of opportunity. Do we just add the 61 to that 380? Are we up in the...
Well, what will happen is several of those 61, if you saw the bridge that wasn't dropped, that could possibly be reattacked. I'm not sure if they will, depending on how they feel. But some of these targets, I think the targets the Secretary is talking about include some of the fielded forces, but generally they're the fixed targets we're talking about. If you go out and hit a target of opportunity that's 4 trucks, After you come back and you've actually destroyed it, it may go onto the list as a target per se. But really what we're mainly talking about in the macro number is the large fixed targets.
50, I mean 450 fixed targets so far?
No, I think the Secretary mentioned a number, if it was correct, and, yeah.
The answer is there have been about 270 fixed targets and about 100 targets of opportunity on top of that, for a total of slightly more than 380 targets. Now that includes, as I said, 270 fixed targets and about 100 targets of opportunity. As the General explained, a target of opportunity might have 4 or 5 trucks, or it might be 1 tank. It just depends where we find the concentration of vehicles or equipment, and what sort of ordnance we hit it with.
For instance, in the 31 targets in the engagement area, how many of those would be pre-planned fixed targets, and how many would those be targets of opportunity?
There are both pre-planned. Let me explain it this way. If they go out today, and the weather's excellent, and for some reason the forces are moving around, they will hit those forces. If they aren't moving around, before they go home, they have a backup target they might hit. That would be a fixed target. So some of those 31 could be targets that were pre-planned, they knew where they were, or if they went out and had an opportunity to find a tank and they would bomb that tank, they'd do that instead and then go back after that.
They're going to bomb something.
They will bomb something.
Are you saying that the first thing they're going out for is whatever they find, and then if they don't find anything, then they go for this fixed target, or they
There are some missions that are actually rolled to do what's called close air support, which is a little bit of a misnomer because we don't have friendlies on the ground, but they are actually out there to support with a forward air controller, and they would roam the area to try to find a target that either was popped up at that time or by intelligence of some sort we found. They actually have bombs that can be dropped on fixed targets as well, and they will go out and support a forward air controller, and they don't go out and just drop their bombs. We want to have bombs available on a moment's notice, so they would be in the area with the forward air controller. There are other aircraft that actually go out and hit targets that are fixed.
To follow Charlie's question on Belgrade and the reason that Belgrade has not been bombed in a few nights, are the maps, is all the intelligence available being reassessed and revised, and are people who have been on the ground there that are NATO people been on the ground in Belgrade being used to give personal intelligence about these particular targets, so a mistake may be avoided?
First of all, we're not going to talk about intelligence, but I will say that, just as the Secretary mentioned, it's under full review from top to bottom with every methodology we can use. In the meantime, we won't talk about future targeting, but nothing's off limits that I understand.
That's what the B-52s did, General. Today, yesterday, B-52 strikes, where were they? What size, capability did they use?
Well, the B-52s are striking, as I showed in some pictures here, they're attacking targets that would be beneficial for that type of weapon. So they're attacking targets that are a little bit more of an area type target. It could be a runway, it could be fielded forces, it could be that type of thing.
Revetted positions along the border?
Sometimes when we find them, they will attack. That would be a type of target they could attack, possibly.
What have they?
Yes.
General, on close air support, you said it was a bit of a misnomer because there were no friendlies on the ground, but we keep hearing reports of clashes between the KLA and either the VJ or the MUP. To your knowledge, are any of the targets of opportunity or any of the pre-planned missions in support of the KLA in its clashes with the VJ or the MUP?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
That's not what we're there for. We're there to degrade the Serb VJ army to the point that Milosevic decides he's either had enough or his army's degraded to the point where it becomes ineffective. As a consequence of that, if the UCK has more good fortune and effectiveness, that's the consequence. That is not the objective.
But just to pursue, General Shelton made it clear that one of the outcomes that is foreseen is that the balance of power changes on the ground between the KLA and the VJ and the MUP.
Well, I think just exactly the way he said it. That's a consequence. That's one of the factors that Milosevic has to take into account. There are several things he has to decide on. And when he finds that there's a point when he has a disadvantage for whatever reason, whether it's because he wants to defend his own country, whether it's because his army says you're crazy and what you're doing is not what we signed up for, when the people of his country decide or when the UCK decide. Any of those, there could be a consequence. But the idea is for his military to lose effectiveness, and they are losing effectiveness in a big way.
General Wald, you'd spoken a couple of weeks ago about the Serb Army reinforcing in Kosovo. So first of all, has that now stopped? Have you seen no additional reinforcements? And can you give us your latest estimate on VJ and MUP forces in Kosovo now?
Understand the VJ MUP forces are about the same level from the standpoint of the macro numbers. We haven't seen any indication of large reinforcements. We're watching for it. And as they do reinforce, we will attack them.
So if the numbers are static, how do you explain the numbers being static then if no reinforcement?
Well, I think saying they're static is probably a misnomer. I think they're going down, but it's hard to tell. We aren't out there counting individuals. But from the standpoint of their overall capability, it is going down because of what we just talked about. It's hard for us to count individuals.
So you just don't have force levels?
My intuition is the whole thing is going down.
General, what constitutes the most successful day of bombing in the 50 days? Is it strictly the number of sorties or your ability to restrike targets more quickly, pass information around? From a layman's standpoint, what constitutes the most successful day?
I think the last part you just said is the ability to either hit pre-planned targets effectively and add on to that our ability to find fielded forces and hit them effectively. And our ability to find fielded forces is increasing. Now, what's happening in reverse there, Tony, is that his fielded forces aren't moving around as much. I mean, they're hunkering down. They know they can't move. Weather like this is the most bothersome thing to Milosevic and his army that can happen. And I think some of the things you've seen over the last few days, some of the kind of ploys he's tried to pull are because he knows darn well the weather's getting good. And when the weather gets good, he has no sanctuary per se. And when he does come out of sanctuary, he'll be attacked.
Your Predators and J-Stars and all your intelligence working better now?
It's a combination of all that, and they're all working very well.
General, during the Persian Gulf War, there came a time when Iraqi soldiers were afraid to stay in their tanks, and when they would hear Allied planes or helicopters, they would get out of the tanks in anticipation of them being attacked. Have you seen anything like that in terms of in the Yugoslav army forces? Are they anybody getting out of their tanks? Are they afraid to stay in their tanks?
I've heard anecdotal stories of people leaving where they were at night because they've heard bombing. We see tanks sitting what appear to be probably unmanned in some places next to buildings at times. We see, I showed you an airplane today that's sitting out in the middle of a runway. I mean, that's one of the last thing a pilot wants to see is his airplane blown up. So I can't imagine they just leave it out there for a target. So I suspect they're probably, if they had a choice, they wouldn't leave any of these vehicles any place where anybody could attack them, and they would be doing something different with them except parking them someplace and not using them. So I suspect your answer is exactly that.
General, when would you expect to start flying?
Question to an analyst.
When would you expect to start flying this encirclement that the Secretary talked about coming in from the north and the east as well?
Well, we're coming in from both the north and the south, as you know, and the other areas of entry should be within a matter of days, I believe.
On a weekend? Or?
I can't tell you exactly when. It would be just like telling you exactly when we're going to hit a certain target. Wouldn't be right.
Yes, sir.
General, what keeps him going so long against the NATO and most powerful countries or military in the world? Who's behind? Who's supporting him?
Milosevic, you mean?
Stand Yugoslav dictator.
The only thing I can answer, and I mean this sincerely, is he obviously has a lot more of a tolerance for his people's pain than he has to take himself. So he has no regard for what his people are having to endure. Thanks.
One of the videos you showed us today appeared to be a pretty...
Come on. Come again tomorrow?